I checked the camera and I feel like my under eye bags are so big I could pack for a trip. But anyway, welcome to this video. Today we'll be talking about Midnight Mass and its symbolism. So a couple of disclaimers. First of all the spoilers. I do not recommend watching this video if you have not seen the show. Second of all, micro review. I was told by someone that I forgot to include a review of the latest James Bond in my James Bond video. So if you want a quality control thing, it's one of my favorite shows of all time. I would give it a 10 out of 10. It's excellent. That's why I am paying it so much attention. And for the third thing, oh yeah, this video will be focusing on the visual language, the metaphors and the symbols. Therefore, some things which could have been key to the plot or have been pretty big plot points are not going to be paid much attention in this video. I'm going to do a quick rundown of these things at the end of the video, but honestly, very little screen time for them. The symbols are what we're going to talk about today. Asian pasta, Asian noodles, and half pizza kebab joint. All of the things it serves are excellent. I hope this will be good as well. They don't make it, they just buy it. So let me just start with a very short. This series takes place on Crockett Island. I don't know where that's supposed to be in the United States, but in the United States. And at the beginning of the show, this community of under 300 people has 3 new incomers to the island. There is Sheriff Hassan Sharif, who's been there for a little while, and then in the first episode a new priest arrives, as well as Riley, who comes back after having spent some time in jail. Those 3 characters just stir the crockpot. Sharif by being the only Muslim on the island, Riley by first of all being ex-convict, but also struggling with his faith, having come to a decision that he's an atheist, and the new priest with just his new fresh ideas, very compelling sermons, and also just his plan for the village. There's also a very important 4th character who's Erin. Erin has been there for a while. She also has returned, but it's been months. She's pregnant and she's the witness. I'll say that's how we start the show. We think she's kind of an observer for the events. The Crockett Island community is a very religious one. Most of the community attends church. There is one on the island, which is an established long time ago Catholic parish. So before I start about the symbolism, I thought that I'd introduce the concept of moral foundations theory. This theory talks that, well, I was introduced to it on my psychology course. I am a psychology student. It essentially has to do with the fact that left-wing people and right-wing people won't really reach a consensus, morally speaking, because left-wing morality has 2 pillars and right-wing morality has 5 pillars. What are these pillars? In order to be a good person in left-leaning beliefs, you only need to do no harm and do good. So don't harm anybody and also perform acts of goodness. But on the flip side, on the right-wing morality, these 2 pillars are significantly less important, or just if there are two pillars of morality, they carry your inner moral compass. But for the right-wing morality, there are 5 pillars and none of them are really more important than the other. Of course, that depends person to person. What are these 5 pillars? Well, of course, do good and do no harm, but also respect the authority, respect the sanctity as a concept, purity is an aspect of morality, and there is also the loyalty rule and belonging to a group, that just being loyal to your people is also an aspect of what makes you a good person. I'm not really going to talk about this a lot, but I think if you think that this community is mostly Christian, so they mostly, to varying degrees, have those 5 pillars of morality, you can maybe rewatch the show with that in mind, because I think it's interesting to see how these values vary from person to person, and also how they influence each other. And this influence, this circle of one aspect of goodness influencing the other, is something that I am going to focus on. But in general, yeah, that concept of morality, interesting to me. Also, the people that stand out, so Omar Sharif, even though he's religious, very religious, he believes in Islam, and Riley, they both seem to subscribe more into this 2-pillar morality concept. Sorry, I have to open the door for Kira. So the first symbol I'm going to talk about is Ichthys, or the fish. I wanted to talk about the symbols that I paid the most attention to while watching the show, but then when I rewatched it for this video, the first image we see on the screen is the fish, which foreshadows the themes of the show, or just not even foreshadows, just informs us that Christianity is going to be a prominent theme in the show. So how does a fish relate to Christianity? So at the time of persecution of early Christians, the fish is something that they used to identify themselves, and it became a religious symbol, because the word ichthys, meaning fish in Greek, is an acrostic, and a word like this acrostic about Jenny Lind, the opera singer, who was nota bene one of the first celebrities ever, whose fame was manufactured by P.T. Barnum. It's completely irrelevant except for the concept of acrostic, because every letter of the word ichthys, I'm saying it the Polish way, corresponds to relate to Christianity. So there is quite a lot of mention of fish as a meal, most notably in the parable of feeding the multitude, where Jesus multiplied 5 pieces of bread and 2 fish to feed 5,000 people. You can interpret it many ways. Some people see it literally, that he literally multiplied the meals. There are also more less magical interpretations, whereas because he was so charismatic, he made people pool their resources together, and that's how they shared and fed everyone. Both are cool. And moreover, fish was one of the meals, I think, ignore Kira and her stick. Fish was one of the meals present during the Last Supper, and because of its special place in the Bible and one of the Jesus-sanctioned meals, fish is actually exempt for the no meat during Lent. Many Catholics don't eat meat on Fridays. Fish is exempt from that, though vegetarians do really consider fish meat. So how does that relate to the show? Most inhabitants of the Crockett Island are fishermen, and their relationship with the sea kind of parallels their relationship with God, and also their status or their identity as a Christian community. So if they take food from the sea, it is as literal as God provided food as you can imagine. I want to point your attention towards the events that predated the show. So there was an oil spill or some kind of chemical spill into the waters, which killed most of the fish. And if you see the fish that you take from the sea kind of as a boon from the Lord, or in general, you can see this as divine punishment. I feel. But also from the other side, the de facto actual religious leader of the community is not Monsignor Pruitt, but Bev, the absolute devil that is Bev, the worst character. I hate her guts. So Bev, and Bev convinced the community to take the money from the settlement and then pull that money, because that money was a gift from God, to pull that money back into the church. From this money, she built a community center, which is not used except for as a shelter during storms. So it is a useless community center. Some people even think that she launders money that way, and she took some of that money for herself. And it works even further as a parallel, because the community is united by church, but individually different people find issues with different aspects of the church or community. So their poor, unbountiful harvest from the sea kind of illustrates and parallels that. So in one sentence, the close and dependent relationship that the people of Crockett Island have with God is mirrored by their relationship with the sea. I'm repeating it because I lost a lot of the footage when my phone died. Specifically, the part where I talk about the imagery of plagues, which is referenced in the show. I do not believe that the imagery itself gives us a lot of insight into the plot, but because it is so obvious, or at least it felt obvious to me, I thought I'd mention it. So in one scene, the people discover dead cats on the beach. The vampire has been feeding on them, but to them it is an unexplainable phenomenon. They do not find out that the cats are drained of blood. They did not notice that. So they think that the cats somehow were killed by the sea or in the sea. They think that the cats come from this small island where kids from Crockett Island go to drink. That part is irrelevant. What's relevant is that the cause of death comes from the sea. The mayor mentions that before the cats, there was an instance where dolphins were left on the beach, dead dolphins who were killed by sharks. And also there was a time where a flock of starlings died on the beach, just fell to the beach. So there is a precedence for different types of strange occurrences occurring on that beach, and I just think that it mirrors the plagues, not directly, but there the river, the water in Egypt turns to blood, then the locusts, frogs come from the blood, I don't know, like flies as well, different types of diseases or maladies or just creatures come from the water or as a result of the water. By the way, there is a really cool hypothesis which explains most of the plagues as a result of an eruption of volcano, which turned with its ash the water in the rivers red, which meant that there was a better breeding ground for the flies and locusts, and the frogs left because the water was no longer good for them, yada yada yada. And also that's why the firstborns died. The fact that they are firstborns is an artistic license, but they died because of the contamination of the water. but coming back to Crockett Island, I think just the image of bad things coming from water and them being a punishment, divine punishment, and the sea is kind of like a parallel to the relationship with God. It's a thing that is observable. I think also the imagery of plagues brings into the mind the fact that the first plague was the water turning into blood, and blood being quite relevant to the show. So let's move on to another thing, which is the parable of the Prodigal Son, which is a very famous and well-known story from the Bible. And I think the show more so enters a dialogue with the parable than comments on it or tries to recreate it. In the actual parable, a father had two sons. One stayed with him and worked for him, with him, and the other one took the money that he was owed and spent it all, drank heavily, lost it, and then became a beggar. When he saw that his father's servants had better life than him, he came back and asked his father, prostrated himself in front of the father, and asked the father if he could become his servant. The father opened his arms and said that he's just glad that he returned and welcomed him with a party, essentially, and with aplomb, and reinstated him as a son with full benefits and monetary access, presumably. The other son, I think, is given to voice in the Bible, and I think he was jealous and asked why was he treated so well if he spent all of the father's money, whereas he stayed with his father. So why is he rewarded for bad behavior, essentially? And the father said that essentially, son, have more grace, he was missed, we should be glad that he's here. How does it translate into the show? In the show, the family is the same plus a mother, and it's interesting because it's actually the mother in the family who plays the role that the father played in the story, because the mother, Riley's mother, is a good Christian in all senses of the word. She's a good person, also a good, God-fearing, church-going Christian, and she's one of my favorite characters of the show because she essentially personifies the correct way to be a Christian to me. She's not a bigot, she's a good person, and she benefits from it because the Bible is her moral code. The Bible gives her solace and help, and because of that because of her faith, she's able to have the grace to welcome her ex-convict son with open arms and love and support him. Whereas the father actually struggles with it. And I think he also slightly struggles with his relationship with God. It's not as strong as his wife's is. He's not always seen in church when she is. But on the other side, when Riley doesn't want to go to church, he forces him to because it will make his mother upset if he won't. So he perceives church more, I think, as a duty. And I think that is part of why he struggles so hard with forgiveness. But that's one possibility. On the other hand, maybe he struggles because the Bible is so literal and he is very much into following rules and having, having certain expectations. And Riley, when he comes back, he does not really behave the way the prodigal son does. He doesn't beg father, he doesn't ask for a job. He returns, and now we're moving on to Riley. He returns because he has no other option. Ex-convicts are not really easily employable, are they? So he has no way to earn a living. Return back home is his only option. It also hurts him because he was so successful before he became an alcoholic and killed that girl. So he struggles, and also the fact that he lost his faith, it parallels the fact that he does not behave the way that Prodigal Son did in the story. And when it comes to the brother, this one has no jealousy because he has nothing to be jealous of. His brother was in jail for 4 years and his father is angry at him. The younger son doesn't really play a lot of a role, which is also kind of a commentary, and nice that he does not really feel the jealousy, because he could have been angry because his brother is perceived to be a bad person by many people in the community because he killed someone. So he also shows grace to his brother. I think that counts. Now moving on to number 3, which will be a rather small section. I wanted here to explore a difference between a metaphor and a symbol. Every time Riley goes to sleep, at some point the show shows him red and blue lights on his face, and then it cuts to the image of his victim, of the drunk driving accident victim, with pieces of mirror in her face. And I do not think this is a symbol for anything, because a symbol is a stand-in for a certain concept. What we're shown here is a metaphor, so a comparison between two distinct things, because the very literal image of Riley staring at his and seeing his victim is just an external show of his internal conflict, internal struggle, and probably intrusive thoughts and a vicious cycle of thoughts of guilt and shame that he feels every day before he goes to bed. I think we could have counted it as a symbol if they stopped at the lights flashing on his face, because then the red and blue lights would have stood in for showing his internal conflict. But because the imagery is so complex, it is more of a metaphor, but it's also not the deepest part of the show, I feel. I think it was one of the more true horror elements, the way that she looked. But I thought it would be interesting. I hoped you didn't mind that. The fourth thing I wanted to talk about is the symbolism of Easter. The whole show takes place during the Easter time, and Easter imagery is Easter symbolism really is important in it. This takes like pear, but also with a hint of banana in it. But it's fine. So I mentioned in the intro this circle of influences, and I'll come back to it here. Easter in general is a moment in the Christian Catholic faith where you think on rebirth, the circle of life. I mentioned the circle of influences. So in the show, the church and community are linked in the mind of the people. It was showed when the mayor, for example, asked the Muslim sheriff, to attend mass, because it would show that he is a part of the community. Also, there was an event, like a community events have a church undertone, and also church is the meeting place for the community and where they celebrate every week together. Moreover, church and religion is part of what makes you a good person in the community mindset. So if you belong to community, you don't really have a reason not to go to church. It's really showcased by the end when the people who don't attend church are excluded from the community. So I hope that was kind of clear. Even more so, rebirth is seen as a healing, but also restoration, and in that sense, restoration to status quo. So this whole circle shows that the events taking place during the show are meant to restore the order, the original state, both by healing the community literally and also spiritually, but also just making things traditional and the way they are. The priest is the same priest that they had in their childhoods, but he's now young. I think it's interesting how a part of healing was Erin no longer being pregnant. I will talk about the pregnancy a little later, but if you think about healing as a restoration of status quo, it makes sense that she would be restored to her non-pregnant state, because it's a kind of a paradox in Erin's situation, because she was participating in her own circle of life. She was going to bring new life into the world, but restoration, as in going back to the way things were before, takes precedence of it, and that's why the baby is removed. When it comes to the actual symbols of Easter, we don't really see many of them. I didn't really see any traditions that we, for example, have in Poland in Catholicism. I don't think they have it elsewhere. There was no consecration of foods, for example, which is a part of Polish Catholic Easter. There was no consecration of palms. They are those sticks made of flowers that are significant in Polish Easter. But the imagery that was present was the colors of chasubles. It's called ornat in Polish. This priest's outfit. The colors that we are shown are gold or white and purple, and the priest consciously chooses the white chasuble as his first outfit. Even though it's made for extraordinary special days, he wears the white chasuble because his arrival foretells and it's meant to symbolize the upcoming change within the community. But he also wears the purple chasuble, which is like the sad chasuble. It's worn for Lent and sometimes for masses for that are for the dead. And while I don't think the purple was particularly significant to the episodes it appeared in, because he switched between the two, the fact that the only two colors are the colors of change and color of contemplation, of penance, of mourning, are truly significant. And even more to the themes of Easter, I wanted to show that the themes of Easter being the rebirth, change, and eternal life corresponds to the gift that he brought to the community. In general, his understanding of the imagery of the Easter kind of allows him for the bastardization of the rites, because he mirrors, for example, Jesus's healings. He healed a cripple. I am using the word cripple because that's what it was in the Bible, a disabled girl. He healed Lisa. He healed everybody because that's what Jesus did. And also he tapers. He messes with the communion, but by introducing a different transformative blood into it. So maybe that's not even part of the Easter, but in general the church rites are significant, and the show makes a point of utilizing parts of the Bible, and because of their literal interpretations, having them lend weight to the arguments towards the priest's cause, which is turning everybody into vampires. Love that I got to say it. And speaking of parts of the Bible, the chapters. Every chapter is named after a different part of the Bible, so I wanted to briefly talk about it. The first episode is called Genesis. The Genesis in the Bible speaks about the origins of the world, and this is the origin of the event. This is the starting point of the story. So yeah, not really much more to tell. The second part is Psalms. Psalms are kind of like a call to action, and the episode both had a theme of mobilizing forces, but also a literal call to the Psalms in the Bible by the Monsignor during the sermon. And his sermon about psalms, songs, and rebirth was really moving to me. I really loved it, and it made me miss church a little bit, not going to lie. The third episode is called Proverbs. Proverbs is kind of like what it sounds like, kind of, I'll say parables, in general, instructions for life, I'd say. And within the story, the characters start asking questions and doubting stuff, so they're in need of a guidance. The relationship of the Proverbs as a part of the Bible with their episode is that Proverbs are more so the answer towards the needs expressed in the episode. The fourth episode is called Lamentations. Lamentations are a poetic lamentations about the loss of Jerusalem, and with the show they're paralleled with the first losses, the first tragedies. Erin loses her baby. The priest loses his access to light. He's turning point. He's so vampiric at this point that he has no access to light. And also we lose the first significant character, who was Joe. Number 5 is Gospel, and that was the most unclear to me in terms of interpretation. The Gospel is literally referred to in the episode. The priest gives a sermon on the Gospel and Word of God, and it's a very angry sermon. I think that's the turning point for many characters, where they start really questioning the morality and the goodness of priests' actions. But also it's interesting to me that within the episode, the person who spreads the perceived word of God, as in spreads the information about the vampiric transformation, is Riley, who is an atheist. And I don't really have any explanation as to how that relates into his role in the story as a potential prodigal son. Maybe it's just for that his role was kind of highly religious and biblical within the storyline. But it's super interesting that he spreads the gospel to Erin, and that's the episode. It seems that Riley is the protagonist, or he is the protagonist for most of the story, but then Erin has the role of the witness. From the beginning, she's an observer. Her presence is accepted and tolerated because she participates in the community. But within this episode, her role becomes more involved with the events of the series. She starts to search for answers and tries to save people. The 6th episode is Acts of the Apostles, which within the Bible is about the spread of Christianity by the apostles, throughout the Roman Empire, which makes sense because this episode involved the literal spread of the vampirism throughout the community, and the message that the priest tries to spread. It just people keep believing and commit to this ideology. And the last part is Revelation, also in text related within the episode. I think Revelation was actually quoted by Bev in the previous episode. Revelation is the apocalypse. I think St. John's in St. John's Gospel, but in general it just describes the events of the end of the world. Actually, I think Bev quoting the apocalypse in the previous episode foreshadows the apocalypse in the finale of the show, because she mentions directly the flames that smite the unfaithful or something. In general, the things that she mentioned take place in the finale, part of them being the fire and the flames. So yeah, it is the apocalypse, it is the end of the world, it is the end of the Crockett Island as we know it. Everybody who subscribed to the ideology and also several bystander victims die. And with that we come to the closing of the show, which is Dust and Ash. I do not believe that dust in this sense is a callback to the biblical dust, as in you came from dust and to dust you will return, because that you came from dust and to dust you will return again implies a circle, and that would mean that the story is bound to repeat itself. And while it's possible, I felt that the ending with Lisa losing the feeling in her legs was more so closing, so it's more that the dust settles, so it's just a framing device for the show. Also, literally everybody burned, so the dust makes sense. I don't think it's biblical dust, I think it's metaphorical dust. And the last part that I wanted to talk about are the Stations of the Cross. In the 3rd episode, where now young Monsignor Pruitt confesses, when he tells his story of finding the angel in the desert, several of the points in his story correspond to different stations on the cross, and they are very literally represented as reliefs. Relief, both in Polish and in English, is a flat sculpture. That's what they are. I don't know the pronunciation though, so I'll just call it the Polish relief. They are symbolized by several reliefs, which just correspond to different stations of the cross. Stations of the cross, or Via Crucis, is just a series of depictions starting at Jesus being sentenced to death and ending with him being laid in tomb. But I know Stations of the Cross more so as praying points when you talk about the rosary, or in general, Stations of the Cross is kind of like a ritual, a type of mass, a type of pilgrimage. It can have many other iterations. It's very popular in Poland. So when I saw this imagery is so clear to me. I don't know whether it's in Catholicism. Okay, I'll put a pin in that, because here is kind of where we might differ. I don't think I've seen Stations of the Cross in churches outside of Poland that very commonly, but in Poland every church I think has Stations of the Cross, just as either reliefs or pictures around the church. I don't think it's there anywhere. And one more thing I wanted to mention about the differences. I don't think there was a communion in the form of wine in Polish Catholicism in ever. Just, I don't know, maybe in Middle Ages. But for the longest time, we only partake in the communion as in the form of bread, not wine. So that was interesting to me. But it makes sense that even if in the US it differs from place to place, that they would choose blood as a sacrament because it was pertinent to the plot. But also the parallel of the, bastardized and bad blood feeding the masses just makes sense. Going back to the Stations of the Cross, there's a total of 14 of them, but the show only shows 7. The first one is Monsignor Pruitt Travels to Jerusalem, numbered 1, so it corresponds to the station of Jesus being condemned to death, which makes sense because Monsignor Pruitt at that time was a man with a very heavy dementia, so he was literally sent kind of to his death or to his doom by his well-meaning community. The second short station is numbered 2, and it's Pruitt wandering into the desert, which parallels the second station, Jesus taking up his cross. So in the sense, Pruitt wandering into the desert takes on his cross, which is his disease, which he will be struggling with at the moment. That's his cross in this particular scenario, his health, his struggle. The third short station is the sandstorm, which parallels Jesus falling for the first time. I think the significance of it is that wandering away is Monsignor Pruitt's first failure on this venture, on his Via Crucis. The fourth showed station is actually numbered 5, which is the creature feeds on Monsignor Pruitt. In the Via Crucis, it's Simon of Cyrene helps carry the cross, which was not really clear to me, but I think it corresponds to the feeling that Monsignor Pruitt describes while being fed on, that all his fear and all his insurmountable pain left him when it was being done. So in that sense, the creature feeding parallels the help of Simon of Cyrene. The fifth shown is number 9. Pruitt names the creature angel, which corresponds to Jesus falling for the third time. I think it kind of is like just his last failure. We could debate in the middle what his second failure was, because first one was wandering to the desert, the third one was calling the creature angel and perceiving its sanctity, seeing it as a divine being. I think I would argue that the middle one would be wandering into a cave, seeing solace in the cave. And I think this station just cements this series of pictures as a twisted, bad, evil version of the Via Crucis. The sixth is number 11. Monsignor drinks of the angel's blood, which corresponds to Jesus being nailed to the cross. I think the link between the two is more symbolic, like the presence of blood, for example, blood being transformative, as in via kind of like Jesus's blood is present in the communion where it's being transformed, and it parallels the transformative power of the angel's blood. But more importantly, the actual picture, the relief, is shown bleeding, and that, I think, well, it's a magical occurrence, so I'd say it symbolically elevates the creature as a holy. More so, also it parallels stigmata, which are the wounds that Jesus received while on the cross. They are typically hands, feet, the ribs where he was cut, and also sometimes on the forehead because he was wearing this crown of thorns. And it also, apart from Jesus, some saints also received these stigmata, supposedly because they are so holy that their body parallels that of Jesus Christ. So with the creature receiving stigmata is also part of seeing just it being seen as holy. And the third parallel, I'd say, I think maybe the best, which might sound weird for some people, that being nailed to the cross and the creature feeding Monsignor Pruitt his blood is the parallel leads through a pelican. For the longest time in Christianity, a pelican was a symbol, a stand-in for the imagery of Christ, even in Middle Ages. Here are some pictures. Because it was thought to, in times of drought or famine, to cut its chest and feed its young with its blood, which paralleled Jesus Christ. There are certain biological explanations for that, but in general, it has nothing to do with blood. The pelicans do not really feed blood to its young, but this imagery was very prominent for the longest time. So feeding the blood to someone is kind of paralleling Jesus and paralleling sacrifice, but this version is warped and twisted because the creature doesn't really lose anything in it. It's not a sacrifice, it's a spread of disease, actually. And the last one, so the seventh one was number 14. Pruitt leaves the cave and takes the creature to Crockett Island, which parallels Jesus being laid in tomb. I mean, it doesn't really parallel it. It's a complete deviation because Monsignor Pruitt is not being laid to rest, but only starts his journey. Yeah, it starts his journey in general. And with how the cave looks, it kind of looks like a tomb. But the Monsignor himself likens it to a church, so that really showcases how warped his perception is. But to us, the tomb parallel is there. It looks like a tomb. I also see a little bit of a link between that story and the story of Jesus being tempted by the devil in the desert, literally. I will check it. It's Matthew 4, 1:11, verses 1 to 11, first to 11, whatever. In there, Jesus has been fasting in the cave for 40 days, and their devil tempts him by offering him or reminding him that he, as God's son, is able to turn the stones into desert. In general, he kind of tempts Jesus with being just demonstrating his holiness and his powers in order to alleviate his own suffering. Jesus, of course, does not accept and is not tempted. But I think Monsignor Pruitt, while not really given a choice, is faced with the same temptations, or the same things occur to him because he is susceptible to different kind of godly transformations. I think that the analysis would have to be a bit deeper than that, but yeah, that's how I see it. Number 1, I really liked how the show still managed to include some classic horror elements, such as jump scares with the angel, for example, when he popped up in the windows or flashed his eyes in the cave. But my favorite one was the one where he attacked Riley wearing a coat and a hat, specifically because of what he was wearing, and I will elaborate on that in a second, on this portrayal. The second thing I wanted to mention is how the priest's behavior mirrors the symptoms of alcoholism, which he within the show attempts to maybe not cure but manage with Riley and Joe, and he succumbs to the temptation. The third thing I wanted to mention is the way that the vampire is portrayed, because that's the Polish accent that I promised on Reddit. Because when he is shown, for the most part, in this coat and hat, this image is so evocative of the way that the devil is portrayed in Polish folklore. In all legend, if you meet a dashing stranger, or a stranger who's wearing a hat and weird shoes, or just then it is the devil. He's wearing a hat because he's concealing his horns. And there are several scary folklore stories where you partake in dinner with a stranger, you look under the table and he has hooves. So this imagery is just so evocative. When I saw it, I was like, oh, that's the devil. Of course it is. What's more interesting, that Adventure Time also had a vampire dressed like that. But I think it's just in general in folklore, the overlap between a devil, like a smaller rank devil, and a vampire, as just, they overlap symbolically. Also, I wanted to point out that it's so easy for this devout community and this priest to believe that the vampire is actually the angel, because the descriptions of angels' true forms in the Bible are that I'll put some pictures of the interpretations here, but in general, a lot of eyes, a lot of wings, but first and foremost, the angels strike fear into the hearts of those who perceive them. So that's why it's so easy to imagine angel of the Lord looking like that. I do not think that Erin's pregnancy loss was meant in any way to comment on the church's relationship with the pro-birth movement. Yeah, I think it was more so a device to help further the plot than actual piece of commentary. It doesn't really detract from it being a pretty good device to further the plot. Oh yeah, I don't think I used it in the video, but I really wanted to call Bev Jazabev, but I didn't really want to talk about her too much. I find her so abhorrent and disgusting. She disgusts me so much, and I think the most interesting thing about her is how her treating the Bible in such a literal way allows her to excuse her lack of conscience, because she picks and chooses, even though she takes the literal approach to the Bible, because the conscience is kind of like a gift which allows you to distinguish right from wrong, because she doesn't feel bad about things that she does, how she hurts other people and other creatures, even though those things are expressly forbidden in the Bible. She decides that that her lack of conscience, her lack of remorse should take interpretational precedence over the actual implications of her actions, which are expressly prohibited within the Bible. She says this quote where she's supposed to be wise as serpents, innocent as doves. I don't know, she's abhorrent and disgusting. I lied, I have more to say about Bev. I am also channeling her right now, I hope you can see it. Bev is so dead set on shaping the world to the literal word of the Bible, as well as finding justifications for the general shittiness of her character in the text, that she misses out on the key message that Jesus gave us in the Bible, which is love thy neighbor. She really, really pick and chooses which parts of the Bible she likes. And here I want to do a little digression. Every time a Christian quotes Leviticus specifically, or any part of the Old Testament at you, they are, in my opinion, most of them full of shit, because they are not aware that, specifically if they are Catholic, that Jesus dying and the new covenant just kind of erases, for the most part, the laws that were stated in the Old Testament. There are, of course, different ways of interpretation, because there are interpretations which say that the laws apply until the new covenant arrives, which means that all laws are irrelevant. Or there is an interpretation that the laws in the Old Testament are all relevant unless stated otherwise, but since the Catholic doctrine does not make you stone people to death, does allow for the wearing of mixed fabric even by the clergy, I think it is in the Old Testament as well not to serve meat and milk together, so the kosher way. Catholics don't have to do that. It's bullshit. Okay, but coming back to Old Testament, my point is that Bev loves the Old Testament. She loves hellfire, harsh punishments, and the Old Testament God, and she wants that because this concept of raging hellfire upon the sinners is something that appeals to her, because she herself wants to be a religious leader, and because she does not have a direct link and communication with God, she de facto becomes a false prophet when she takes charge and starts interpreting the Bible herself later on. She becomes a false prophet, so something that should be in contradiction with her beliefs. So as this self-appointed religious leader, she wants to punish those who don't go to church and force everyone to behave the way she wants them to. So she sets everything on fire, and in this fire only those who deserve it are supposed to burn. But because she was a false prophet, actually all those who followed her died suffering in this said fire. I really loved the way that she was put down very kindly by Riley's mom when she mentioned that Bev is not a very good person and she shouldn't really be suffering at the thought that God loves her only or just as much as every other person, including, say, a murderer that is Riley. That was great. And every time I think of Bev, this Ted Bundy film title comes to mind. What was it? Extremely wicked, shockingly vile and evil. That's her. Disgusting. Just to wrap it up, I wanted to mention how that the show is cast so well. There is not a single weak performance. I think the highlights would be Sheriff, I think. Also, Riley's mom is amazing. Erin is played by one of my favorite actresses. I mean, I haven't seen her in a ton of non-horror work, but Kate Ziegel is great. I had two casting issues though, not performance issues. First of all, the priest was played by Hamish Linklater, who played in Pushing Daisies. He played as a guy who had horse tibia transplanted. Yeah, he was the horse tibia guy for me. Watch Pushing Daisies, he's pretty great. And second of all, Riley is played by Zach Gilford, but for the whole show I thought that it was Joseph Morgan, who I know from Immortals, the supernatural film about Theseus, where he played a castrated soldier. He was the no balls guy for me for the whole show as well. I really struggled to divorce this performance, and it's not even him. Zach Gilford is not Joseph Morgan somehow, and the fact that he was so timid and his performance was so like Morgan's post the ball incident. Yeah, okay. Except I think that's it. My brain is just steaming. I hope that you liked it. If you did, consider subscribing, and if you really did, maybe consider supporting me and Kira on PayPal. We are saving for a start in a dog tracking championship. if we don't really gather enough, it's just going to go towards her further training as a dogotherapy dog, which, you know, we're getting there. Thank you. See you next week, and bye bye.